This video is going to discuss scientific methods. The science textbook that we use treats scientific methods as though there is only one right way to do science, and that is what we would call an oversimplification. The work done by scientists can be so different from one another. The textbook cannot include all the methods employed by scientists. Think about it. The work done by paleontologists, those scientists that study living things that once lived on Earth long ago, is very different from the work done by astronomers, those scientists concerned with the stars, space, and black holes. Yet our textbook lumps them all together in the scientific method. On the screen is an image depicting the simplified scientific method. Our science process skills and a broader definition of the work done by scientists will appreciate how real science is done. The graphic on the screen is a flowchart that is on the website How Science Works. There are four main areas on this graph to help us think about what kind of sequences science goes through. It's not linear or a straight line. At the top, the red circle, we see that there's exploration and discovery. The center circle includes testing ideas, which could include experimentation or making observations in the real world, or doing mathematical processes. The purple area talks about how scientists work together in a community and provide feedback to each other. And the other circle includes benefits and outcomes of science and its work. Now, as you can see here on this graphic, though many scientists start here in the exploration discovery and then have to find some way of testing those ideas that come from observation, where scientists go from there, it can vary. And that's why they have all these different arrows here showing the pathways in which scientists could end up taking their work. We're going to examine each of these in greater detail. Oftentimes, science starts in its investigations with some type of discovery or some type of exploration. This graphic shows us some ways that we can look at that. The arrows on the left and right that are pointing inward towards the circle show us some ideas where scientists can start. Maybe new technologies, or a practical problem arises that needs to be solved. Or on the other side, maybe there's personal motivation. A scientist has an idea that is personally motivating him to solve the problem. Serendipity, or one of those happy, unexpected things that happens, like Newton's apple hitting him in the head, that spars some type of this exploration. At any rate, many of our scientific process skills are seen here, like making observations and asking questions and going through and sharing out our ideas. All these things are important in the initial parts of scientific investigations. The next step is testing our ideas. Now, one thing that's important to think about is that when we go through and try to start collecting data, it's not always an experiment. Some scientists rely purely on observation. Sometimes there are subjects that just cannot be experimented on. Like, think of those paleontologists. They cannot experiment on organisms that have been dead for millions of years. So they require their investigations to be based purely on observation. Now, an important part of testing our ideas is that we start out with a hypothesis, an answer to the question that we asked in the previous slide. This is how we're going to start collecting our data. Right? We find our results, and then we try to compare them to what we thought was going to happen. Interpreting data, we can use data analysis, which could include making graphs or statistical analysis of the data, but that gives us some idea on whether or not our data fits not necessarily what we thought was going to happen. Right? Was our hypothesis supported, or was it not supported? Up to this point, it may seem very similar to what we've seen in our textbook. However, the next steps are where we can see the difference in the cyclical nature of scientific work. One of the big parts of scientific work is looking at the community feedback. Scientists do not work in isolation, so they must share their results with others so that they can go through and reproduce their assignment, their experiments, or their observations. They need to provide feedback or peer reviews and publications, and they may end up having discussions with others to try and determine how and what could possibly be better answers, or to delve deeper into the subject. And the last important part of looking at scientific methodology is what happens after the scientists have come up with an idea that is well accepted by their peers. Well, that's where we see the benefits and the outcomes. Well, you may end up having new knowledge built, and that knowledge helps to explain even far-reaching concepts in science. Maybe if it's maybe environmental or health, it can inform policies in government to help people live better lives. So these are all interrelated. So the benefits and the outcomes, especially if we talk about technology, it can make new discoveries and start the whole process over again. This is much different than what we've seen in our textbook. It's not linear. Processes can be redone over and over again as new information is found out. So when we look at each of the parts on our graphic, we can see how science is not as rigid as our book would like us to believe. Scientists end up going through and testing ideas, which is true. But how they end up making a theory, it's quite complex. And how those ideas come into technology and uses for communities could take a long time, which is going to be our next particular topic. So when we look at what happens here, right, science textbooks oversimplify how science works. There's no one right way to do science, and it doesn't always require that scientists have to do an experiment. In order for science to accept new ideas, the community has to be involved so that new ideas are tested thoroughly and are peer-reviewed. It means that people of quite a bit of education look at problems and affirm ideas. And the goal of science is always to add to our understanding of the universe.